New rules pushing complex derivatives known as swaps onto open trading venues go into effect tomorrow in the United States. There's been a lot of chatter about regulation in the wake of the global financial crisis, but the scandals have continued, bringing the legitimacy of the capital markets into question. Our next guest says we do need to do a better job of regulating culture. We are now joined by Justin O'Brien, Director of the Center for Law, Markets and Regulation at the University of New South Wales. Justin, great to have you with us.
Thank you.
It's a very important topic. It's a broad topic. People are trying to get this right. You write and talk about in your new book, which you're launching in Canada tomorrow, about almost the disconnect in terms of what's going on, how fragile our systems are from the financial crisis. Where do we stand right now in terms of trying to really balance this out and any success we've had?
I think where we are at the moment is we're doing quite well on rhetoric. We're not doing very well in substance. And I think that was abundantly clear at the G20 meeting in St. Petersburg the weekend before last, where Mark Carney suggested that a lot had been done, but a lot more needed to be done to achieve real meaningful change. He talked about we haven't dealt yet with the problem of too big to fail. We haven't dealt yet with reforming shadow banking, and we haven't dealt yet with reforming the OTC derivatives market. Decoded, nothing really has happened.
So how fragile are our systems currently to any potential crisis, black swan event as people like to call it?
Well, I think in actual fact we are it's in as dangerous a place as it was in 2007. If you're looking at the markets today, you're seeing that the rise of collateral loan obligations have reached levels not seen since 2007. So structured finance is on the rise again. Covenant-like loans are on the rise again. The chase for yield is on the rise again. And the actual causes of the global financial crisis have not actually been dealt with in substance, in implementation. We know what the architecture is, but it hasn't actually been implemented yet.
What needs to be done? I mean, you talk about this from a cultural perspective, that it really kind of stems from the top, and that there's a real disconnect between the culture of these investment banks and almost their societal obligations. That is a big, broad topic, and to try to make it meet in the middle seems very difficult to do. Is that the right process here?
That is, in actual fact, the right process. I don't really mind what they say their values are. I just want to be able to hold them to account to those values. I think what we've got to do is we've got to recognize that in the past we've relied on compliance, but show me a rule and I'll show you an investment lawyer who will be able to transact around the rule. We talk about the importance of principles, but principles don't operate with people who don't have any principles. All markets are held together by social norms, and so ultimately if we want to fix global markets, we have to really attack the question of the social norms that hold these markets together. Why do people think it's acceptable to behave in ways that they behave?
But go ahead, David.
I just wonder if you separate, I guess, derivative use between speculative and hedging. I mean, certainly there's a lot of speculative use that's very important, or derivative use is very important for hedging. And I'm just wondering, do you lump it all together, or do you?
Oh, no, absolutely. It's like securitization itself. There's nothing unethical about securitization per se. There's something highly unethical if it is misused, as it was traditionally in the United States. Now, for example, the securitization market in Australia never had the same problems as the securitization market in the United States, because it was better run. The quality of the assets were much better. They might still have been rated AAA, but they were better rated, and they were sold, generally speaking, to sophisticated investors who were in actual fact sophisticated.
Justin, so much of what you focus in on as well is the Libor scandal. Talk about misusing benchmarks. What is the view right now as it relates to trying to regulate some of these financial benchmarks? Where do we stand?
Well, Libor is the big scandal. It is bigger than the global financial crisis. This really is the big one, and we're not.
I think that would surprise some people that you say it's bigger than the financial crisis.
Well, I think for a number of reasons. First of all, unlike the global financial crisis, where people could legitimately say this was a perfect storm, this was a confluence of events that we didn't necessarily understand, it was nobody's fault per se. With Libor, it's really quite simple. You could explain it to a child. This is straightforward fraud. This is straightforward collusion. This is not just a problem within an individual bank. Libor could only have been manipulated if there was collusion. And this is not just an academic saying this. This is the Financial Stability Oversight Council in the United States saying this. When it talks about pervasive conduct, it talks about how this crossed boundaries, that it went on for years, it went on undetected, it involves collusion. So it's not just the manipulation of Libor, you've also got the manipulation of Cibor in Singapore, HIBOR in Hong Kong, Euribor, and also Tibor in Tokyo, right? So what you're seeing is a global problem. And I think what's really interesting here is we've had 3 settlements against 3 major banks, UBS, Barclays, and RBS. This is just the tip of the iceberg. It is only a matter of time before Libor crosses the Atlantic and any of the US major banks that were involved in the setting of Libor are caught up in this investigation. This scandal is nowhere near finished.
You know, what's also amazing is the number of times this was brought to people's attention, like the Bank of England or BIS, and it was completely ignored.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, everybody knew from a series of articles written in the Wall Street Journal in 2008 that there were major problems with this, and the regulators didn't do anything about it. Their argument was we were too busy trying to fix the financial system. We didn't have time. That's really, quite frankly, not good enough. What you then had is if you didn't have the intervention of the CFTC in particular, which really started the process of investigating this with no real help from other regulatory bodies, it had to rely on the antitrust division of the Department of Justice to start this process. What you're now seeing, I think, is something which is going to be very, very important, because now it is no longer sufficient for banks to make a major payout. They have to accept wrongdoing, they have to accept criminal charges, and so the bar is rising and rising dramatically.
So let me ask you this, Justin. When you say that this is just the tip of the iceberg as it relates to the Libor scandal, crossing the Atlantic, coming back to the North American markets, walk us through what you think that looks like. You do bring up the word criminal. That might not be in a lot of people's vocabulary right now.
It may not be, but only last week the Department of Justice launched criminal proceedings against brokers in London. So I think it is only a question of time before this happens. Lanny Browder, before he stepped down as Assistant Attorney General, said of the Libor scandal, this will be the biggest white-collar crime case in history. Not that it has the potential to be, this will be, and it will.
Because of the magnitude of the market. Just
because of the magnitude of the market, and because you're talking about collusive activity. You're talking about the operation of a cartel.
Right. So you're talking about not just the size of the market, but the number of people involved.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So to give you an example, in Singapore, it's done something really quite interesting with how to protect the integrity of Cibor, which is not deemed to be globally significant, but is certainly significant in a regional sense. Now, what they did, which I thought was really quite clever, was they decided, well, we'll have a global investigation into whether or not there has been misconduct. So they got the banks themselves to actually conduct the investigation and provide the results to the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And then they dealt with it holistically. So rather than piecemeal, one bank here, another bank here, where it's this ongoing running sore, they basically said, right, we're going to fix Cibor. And we're going to fix Cibor by making sure that all of the contributing banks will deposit an additional amount of reserves with the Monetary Authority of Singapore for a time period, for a year, at no interest. Right. So this is, if you want to do business in Singapore, you have to deposit this money. And you're talking about substantial sums of money. So for the major banks, you're talking $1 billion on deposit with the Monetary Authority of Singapore. That's a very clever way of doing it.
Justin, we only have about 30 seconds left, but I want to get from you, as it relates to how it plays out in North America, are there firms that you think are most at risk, or is this going to be conquered, I suppose, from an institutional-based approach in terms of all of them at once?
Well, I think the bank that is most at risk at the moment is Bank of America, precisely because it was named in Singapore.
All right, we will leave it there. Justin, thank you so much for...
Always comes back to Bank of America, doesn't it?
Thank you so much for joining us. That was Justin O'Brien, Director of the Center for Law, Markets and Regulations at the University of New South Wales. Still ahead, David Taylor gives us his final word. We're going to get a couple of his top picks. Stay with us.